Everybody's walking toward the tightrope on a place in a foreign world. Tidal waves and broken like a starlet. I am made for. I was made to fall in love with you. I was made to fall in love with you. I was made to fall in love with you.
Over the next 3 weeks, we're going to be looking at love, dating, marriage from a biblical perspective, of course. The Bible has a lot to say on our romantic relationships, on our love lives. And week 3, I especially want to draw your attention to it, the final week of the series. It's February 29th and March the 1st. We have a guest speaker coming in, preacher. His name is Ben Stewart. And Ben is he is the pastor at the Passion City Church in Washington, D.C. He's a great preacher, but he's written a best-selling book about this subject on navigating life and love in the modern age. So I especially want to ask you, if you are single or maybe you would say not yet married, if you would make it a priority to be here that weekend and invite anybody in your life that kind of falls under that umbrella to be here that weekend. I think it will be especially helpful. For those of us who are parents and have teenagers or will have teenagers, that we're gonna help them navigate life and love in the modern age. I know the weekend is gonna be a helpful weekend. So again, it's the last weekend in this series. This morning, the title of the message is From Me to We. And what we wanna talk about is the intimacy that God designed marriage to have. The intimacy that he wants us to have as husbands and wives. And yet what I would tell you is it's never been more difficult culturally to move from me to we, because it's never been easier for everything to be about me. Just think through your day. My day starts off, I get in the shower and I use my shampoo. I mean, technically it's the only shampoo bottle in the shower I'm allowed to use. I don't know what a lot of those bottles are even for, but I think that shampoo is mine, that it's been especially formulated for me. Shampoo for me. And then I go into the kitchen, I get some coffee, I get a K-cup for the Keurig, and I don't make coffee for everybody. I just make enough for me. Just 1 cup, just for me. And then I run some errands with my wife. We get in the car, and she's always cold, and I'm always hot, but that's okay, because we've got individual temperature controls, and I can set the temperature for me, just for me. And then I go to the gym and work out, hypothetically for the purpose of this illustration, and it's a hypothetical workout. And I put in my headphones and I get up my playlist that just says my workout playlist, right? It's music for me. You might not want to work out to LL Cool J. You might not want to work out to CNC Music Factory or the Black Eyed Peas, but it's okay. It's not workout music for you. It's workout music. It's for me. And I go later that night, get on Netflix, tap on my name, and I get all these shows that have been especially selected for me, just for me. Netflix did that. And then I go to bed and I put a $5 bill in a jar next to my bed because I'm saving up for the expensive sleep by number mattress so I can have my side of the bed exactly how I want it. It's for me. And we have never lived at a time where it's been easier to make everything about me. And it's hard to go from me to we when everything is about me. And we see this in marriage. We see this in all of our relationships. But it's especially true in marriage that for us to have the kind of intimacy that God longs for us to have, it can't be about me. And yet, everywhere I turn, this is how I'm being discipled, to make life about me. And the only way to go from me to we is if it stops being about me. And we're going to study from Mark chapter 10 in these next few minutes to hear what Jesus has to say about intimacy in marriage. And if you were here last week, we left off in Mark chapter 8, where Jesus fed this crowd of 4,000 plus people. And when he was feeding this crowd, there were some, if you remember, there were some teachers of the law, some Pharisees that tried to trap him by asking him questions about why his disciples didn't honor certain traditions. And so those same Pharisees, those same religious leaders, what they've done is they've followed Jesus now to the region of Judea, right back across the Jordan River, and they're gonna try to do this again. They're gonna try to trap him again. So in Mark chapter 10, starting verse 2, it says, some Pharisees came and they tested Jesus by asking, is it lawful for a man to divorce his wife? And the word test, this word could be translated as provoke. They're trying to provoke him. They want to trap Jesus into saying something that they can use against him to turn the people against him. And in those days, there were a couple of different interpretations about the writings of Moses in Deuteronomy 24 concerning marriage and divorce. And so you have a more conservative interpretation that says it's rarely, if ever, permitted. And you have a more liberal interpretation at that time that says a man can divorce his wife for about any reason. It might be adultery, or she might have burnt the toast. If she displeased him, then it's okay. And so you had kind of these two different interpretations of this passage, and they want to try to pull Jesus to one side or the other. And so Jesus asks them a question, and he says, well, what did Moses command you? And they reply, well, Moses permitted a man to write a certificate of divorce and send her away. Well, I mean, they're trying to corner him. And they want him to answer the question, but Jesus, he's just not gonna do it. And he's not gonna take the bait. He's not gonna pick a side. He's not gonna create division. Instead, he just wants to talk about what's at the heart of the issue and what God has said about it. So here's what Jesus says in verse 5. He says to them, it was because your hearts were hard that Moses wrote you this law. Like, you're wanting to make this an argument, you're wanting to debate the finer points of Deuteronomy chapter 4, and Jesus said, I'm just telling you, this isn't what God had in mind from the beginning, but Moses wrote this to you because your hearts were hard, that the heart of the issue is a hard issue. And he points them to what's happening in their heart. And some of you understand this because when it comes to marriage, your heart has become very hard. Like, you are perhaps sitting next to your spouse, but you feel miles apart. Frankly, you don't want to be here. You don't want to talk about this. You are ready to call it quits. You don't know what to do, but you know that this isn't what you signed up for. If there was a way out, you'd take it. Your heart has become hard. The other thing Jesus does here is he just points them back to the beginning when God originally designed marriage. It says in verse 6, but at the beginning of creation, God made them male and female, and for this reason, a man will leave his father and mother and be united to his wife, and the two will become one flesh. So they are no longer two, but one flesh. Therefore, what God has joined together, let no one separate. And so Jesus describes marriage as this union of two becoming one, of going from me to we. That word union is a strong word. It's not just connection or joining together. It's not even being glued together. It's like two chemicals coming together to form something completely new. That the God of all creation has made it in such a way that when a man and a woman have honored his plan for marriage, they come together as husband and wife, and there is this supernatural union that is possible, a oneness where the two are no longer individuals on their own, but they come together as one. And I think that's what most of us long for. We want to have that kind of oneness and intimacy. I was reading online the top 10 most romantic lines in movies. The number one most romantic line in a movie was from Jerry Maguire, where he says to Renee Zellweger's character, you what? You complete me. And I think that's what we long for. We want to have that kind of intimacy, that kind of oneness. It doesn't take long, though, to find ourselves disillusioned Like if there were a Jerry Maguire 2, and I'm not suggesting that there should be, but if there were, like it would start with, "Yeah, you don't complete me. Not anymore. I thought you did, but you don't." And they would go on a much different journey. So we want to have this, but it just seems always out of reach. When we get married, we long to have this kind of intimate connection. And God says, I'm gonna join a husband and wife together, and what I join together, don't let anyone separate. And so what I want us to do this week is talk about some things that create separation, some things that divide us rather than unite us. When you got married, whether you knew it or not, you pushed down the aisle a wheelbarrow full of bricks. You had your bricks and your spouse had their bricks, but you may not have known about your bricks, and you certainly didn't know about all their bricks, but we all came down the aisle with a wheelbarrow full of bricks. And without meaning to, over months and years, these bricks can start building a wall between us and our marriages, between a husband and wife. And so instead of intimacy, there's this wall that just starts to divide us and starts to separate us. What I want to do is just talk to you about some of the bricks that commonly try to separate what God has joined together. Some of the bricks that make up the wall that tends to divide us as husband and wife. And one brick would be what I would just call unrealistic expectations. And there's actually probably quite a few of these that we come into marriage with, and we don't think it's true for us, but kind of get set up for this, I think. You read books, watch movies as kids growing up about romance and fantasy and the knight in shining armor and the beautiful princess, and then you're dating, and dating isn't real. It's not real life. Like, you act in ways that you are not gonna act once married, and you're caring about everything they see. You care about how you smell. All these things are really important when you're dating, and they become less important when you're married. And then you have the honeymoon and the wedding, and the expectations keep growing. And then what happens? Well, you fast forward into that marriage about 6 months, and suddenly you realize there's some bricks. And the husband sits at the kitchen table, and he's eating his cereal, slurping it. It's like surround sound, it's so loud. And there's an odor that you never noticed before, but now it's just constant, that follows him around the house. And she walks in, and she's wearing this nightgown. It's so modest. It looks like she just walked off the set of Little House on the Prairie. And she gets on to him, "Can you please stop slurping your cereal, please?" And he gives it right back. "Well, maybe you should have married Almanzo. Maybe you should have married Almanzo." It's a Little House on the Prairie reference, because Laura Ingalls, her love interest was Almanzo Wilder. If you didn't know that, you should. And so you're dressed for Almanzo. What? You should have married Almanzo, but he doesn't slurp his cereal. And so they get into this argument from the night before about money and finances, and suddenly their expectations start building this wall. I jotted down some common expectations that add bricks to the wall. Like, so for many of us, there's this expectation that I shouldn't have to work at my marriage, that it should just come naturally. Another expectation that we come to marriage with is that I should always feel in love. Like the feelings should just always be there. I was talking to a young couple a few years ago, and I asked them, how did you know this is the right person for you? And she said, "I know he's the right one for me because when we're together, I always feel these butterflies in my stomach." I'm like, "Oh, that's your answer?" Like, and I Googled quickly on my phone, like the average lifespan of butterflies, and it says less than 12 months. And I'm like, I just want you to see this. Like, those butterflies are gonna die. They're gonna die a slow and painful death. You should just know that. And look, my feelings of love for my wife after 25 years have never been stronger. But there's ups and downs. It's not always gonna feel that way. So another expectation we have is that in marriage, we shouldn't have problems that we can't solve. That if you're married to someone and you can't solve a problem, then maybe you married the wrong person. But Dr. John Gottman and his research says that about 69% of issues or problems in marriage are what he calls non-resolvable, meaning they are perpetual in nature. It's not gonna change. Like, you're not gonna have this one conversation and argument and suddenly for the next 40 years, it's never an issue again. Like, it will continue to be an issue. And so there are certain things like financial stress and in-law stress and a difference in personality, a difference in libido. He says those things aren't just gonna change. About 70% are not able to be completely resolved. So what's that mean? It means that you learn to take away bricks, not by changing, but by accepting. And we'll talk a little bit more about that next week. Another unrealistic expectation we have is, as we say, well, it's my spouse's job to make me happy. And we put that pressure on them. And here's what happens. Expectations lead to pressure. Pressure crushes intimacy. Wherever there is pressure, intimacy will not grow, won't thrive. As soon as you start putting expectations on someone and pressure on someone, then you rob them of an opportunity to love you and express love to you, right? Because now you're approaching them as if they owe it to you. And the minute someone owes something to you, they're not able to give it, and you're not able to receive it. If someone owes you money and they pay you back, you're not grateful or appreciative. They owed it to you. You deserve it. And the minute we start making marriage into this transactional relationship, well, here's what you owe me. And because you're my husband, because you're my wife, here's what I deserve from you. We miss out on an opportunity to have intimacy, and we start to crush intimacy with pressure. I was looking for a Valentine's Day card for my wife on Friday afternoon. And so I'm at the store reading through these cards, and one of the things that struck me as I'm reading through these Valentine's Day cards is that a lot of them, they sound like worship songs. Like, if you open it up, it's like, you light up my life. You are the air that I breathe. You think you're gonna open one up and be like, you are, way maker, miracle worker, light in the darkness. I mean, that's the tone of these cards. And I understand the intent, but what ends up happening is we put incredible pressure on our spouse to do for us what only God can do for us. And if you're looking to your spouse to be your source of joy and happiness, doesn't mean your spouse can't make you happy, but if they are your source, if they are what you're leaning on for those things, that pressure is gonna crush. It's gonna crush intimacy. I was thinking that maybe one of the more romantic and intimacy building Valentine's Day cards might be, you open it up and it just says, Happy Valentine's Day. You don't owe me anything. You don't owe me anything. And the moment you have an environment where that's how you're approaching your spouse, then they have a chance to give you something. And then opportunity begins to grow. But as long as you're approaching it with expectation, well, here's what you're supposed to do. And here's how you're supposed to act. And here's what you should be doing for me. And this is your duty as a husband, and this is your duty as a wife. The minute you start approaching the relationship that way, expectations lead to pressure, and pressure starts to crush intimacy. Another brick, and again, there's probably 2 or 3 here, would be underestimated differences. Like, you get married and you start to realize that you're more different than maybe you thought you were. Let's just do a little test here. Like, how many of you who are married, one of you is kind of highly structured and organized, and the other is a little more unstructured and spontaneous? Raise your hand if that's true for you as a married couple. Okay. How many of you, or one of you is a night person, one of you is a morning person? Raise your hand. That's true for you? Okay. How many of you have someone who's more kind of outgoing, and the other one's a little bit more introverted and quiet? How many of you I know which one of you is raising your hand. And the other one's like, you're embarrassing me, don't raise your hand. We have more differences than we realize, and some of those differences come from the homes we grew up in, because we think our spouse is gonna be the same as maybe a parent. Like my wife grew up in a home where she was a farmer's daughter, grew up raising pigs and driving combines. And when her dad built their house, like he built it out of the woods. Like he just got trees and built the house out of trees. And so now we get married and she's like, that light bulb needs to be changed. And I don't know who to call for that. I'm sure there's people who do that. That seems dangerous to get involved with that. And you have these differences that you bring with you, these ideas of what the person should be doing. And so here's what happens. You get married and suddenly you have these problems that you didn't have before you get married. And you think, well, I didn't have these problems before I married you, so the problem must be you. And we start to blame each other and point fingers because it's hard to be honest about our own struggles and weaknesses. And when it's something so personal that we don't want to fail at, it's just really difficult to say, you know what, I'm not really good at some of these things. Tim Keller, he puts it this way. He says, this is really good. Marriage has a way of introducing you to yourself. If you know, you know. Because if I wouldn't have gotten married, I don't think I would have realized a lot about myself. But when I got married, I realized I am more prideful. I am more selfish. I am more undependable. I am more sinful than I ever realized. And so marriage kind of holds up this mirror, and when we don't like what we see, it's just a lot easier to start putting bricks on the wall instead of being honest about some things that need attention. So here's another brick that I would say kind of adds to the separation, and that would be unmet needs. Unmet needs. Now, there are legitimate needs in marriage that God designed marriage to meet, and when those needs don't get met, they can become expectations, and then the pressure and it kills intimacy. But there are certainly legitimate needs in marriage that we should meet for each other. The problem is, if you're sitting here listening to this and you're thinking of how your spouse should be meeting your needs, that's the problem. Like when you hear there are legitimate needs in marriage that need to be met, are you thinking of yours or theirs? I mean, that's kind of the test here. Willard Harley, in his book, His Needs, Her Needs, kind of outlines the top needs of men and women, and he gives this illustration that I think is helpful. He says, imagine that there's a bottle of water on the table, and the wife is sitting on a stool next to the bottle of water, and the husband is over here, and the husband's thirsty, so he says to his wife, could I get a drink of water? Because I can't quite reach it myself. And she's like, well, I'm busy right now, but ask me tomorrow. Okay. Next day, hey, I'm thirsty. Can I get a drink of water? Well, yesterday was a busy day, so I'm tired today. Ask me tomorrow. Okay. Next day, starting to feel pretty thirsty. Now he's getting frustrated. Hey, could I please get a drink of water? She's like, oh, okay. Well, if you're gonna have that kind of attitude, you're not gonna get any. And then the next day, now he's a little bit desperate, and that's not attractive. And he's kind of begging for some water. Please, can I have some water? And finally she's like, make it quick. And gives him the water, but don't ask again for a while. I asked my wife, I said, can I use that illustration? And she said, here's what she said, I wrote it down. She said, sure, but you need to make it clear that the wife is giving her husband water out of her glass, and if her glass hasn't been filled, she's not gonna have much water to offer. Okay. I don't need more than one preacher in this family. Clearly she understood the metaphor. The point is that we come into it and we have these needs, and our spouse has needs. But the question is, are we focusing on ours or on theirs? Because Philippians 2 says that our attitude should be the same as that of Christ Jesus. And we look not to our own interests first, but to the interests of others. A few other bricks, I'd say one would be unresolved anger. Hebrews 12 talks about the fact that when anger takes root, it spreads like an infection. And so this is what's happened for some of you in your marriage. Like you're married to someone who is angry, and that anger has spread, and now you're angry. And maybe you're married to someone, and it's always a harsh tone. Maybe things quickly escalate to name calling. And it's hard to have intimacy with someone who's like that. Why? Because, human nature, we don't want to be close to a volcano that's gonna erupt, right? We're just gonna keep our distance from volcanoes. And when you feel like somebody's always about to erupt, when you feel like they're always on edge and always angry about something, you just kind of get quiet. You keep your distance, try and stay somewhere safe. Another brick that I need to talk about that I don't really want to talk about is what I will just call an unsafe environment. And I know that there are some of you ladies who are married to a man that you thought was going to be a protector, but he has become a predator. There's no opportunity for intimacy where there is abuse. And for some of you who are in a marriage where you're experiencing especially physical abuse, I want to make sure you understand, and you hear this from me, daughters of God, listen. It is not your fault. You do not deserve it. It is not your job as a Christian wife to fix your husband so that he won't be physically abusive. He will answer to God. You turn him over to God. It's not your job. And I know, sadly, from experience after preaching on marriage over the years, that I know there are men that will come to church and they will use sermons like this to try to manipulate and control and justify physical abuse and to blame their wives for it. And I want to make sure you understand, men, if that is you, you are living on borrowed time. Your only hope is to fall on your face and to repent and ask for help. And wives, if you find yourself in that situation, you just need to know he is a liar, he is a fool, and he has broken his marriage vows. He will answer to God. If you don't feel safe, if you feel scared to share what's been done to you, then you need to get some help. And I want you to know that some of you, I know some of you listen to this and you're hearing it and you feel very much alone because nobody knows. But you are not alone. You are not alone. We will help you. We will help you. Where there is an unsafe environment, there is no room for intimacy. A few more bricks that I want to talk about. I think one brick that I want to talk about, and to stick with our you in alliteration, I'm just going to call it an uncut umbilical cord. Hard to have intimacy when you got the uncut umbilical cord going on. And the reason I kind of like this is because where Jesus here says, for this reason a man will leave his father and mother, the word leave literally means to cut away. To cut away. So it's actually a pretty decent image of what oftentimes doesn't happen. So what's that look like? It looks like a marriage where a husband and wife get into an argument, and he's gonna call his mom because he knows his mom's gonna agree with him. It looks like a marriage where a husband or wife cares more about what mom or dad thinks, or more about mom or dad's opinions and perspective than their spouses, or they're more worried about making mom or dad upset than they are making their spouse upset. They're gonna put mom and dad's needs ahead of their spouse's needs. I have a buddy, he's on staff, he was saying that in their first couple of years of marriage that he and his wife were just having some challenges and struggles, and so he decided he was just gonna leave for a week or two. And so he called his mom, and he thought his mom was just gonna be really happy. Like that she was gonna make him breakfast in the mornings and tuck him in at night. And so he was getting excited about going back home, seeing mommy. And so he calls his mom and says, Mom, we're having these troubles, and I just think I'm gonna come home for a while. Phone silent. Mom speaks. oh, honey, you are home, right? This isn't your home anymore. Like you don't live here. And she made it clear that it wasn't an option. Well, one of the homes that can be hard to cut away from, to leave, are homes where there has been hurt and rejection, and that umbilical cord, it's tied to all kinds of pain and baggage. And a buddy of mine talked to me about the fact that he said it this way. He said, I feel like I'm constantly having to pay the bill her dad racked up the first 24 years of her life. I feel like I'm constantly paying on that bill. Another brick that kind of gets put in the wall would be unrelenting criticism. And the Bible talks about how just constant criticism destroys closeness and intimacy. So Proverbs 17 verse 9 says, love forgets mistakes. And we're gonna talk more about that next week, how love that forgets mistakes removes bricks from the wall. When you keep no record of wrongs and when you learn to have a grace-filled marriage. But Proverbs 17 says, nagging about them parts even the best of friends. It creates separation and division. Proverbs 27 says, a nagging spouse is like the drip, drip, drip of a leaky faucet. You can't turn it off. You can't get away from it, but you sure want to. You don't want to be close. You don't want intimacy when there's constant criticism. Just one last one. It's unrepentant sin. Now, this is a big one. Unrepentant sin. Like for some of you, there's this wall between you and your spouse. And it's because there's secret sin in your life. And you don't think it is all connected, but I'm telling you it is. You think that you can do what you want and say what you want over here. You think you can keep these secrets over here and keep these things in the dark over here. And as long as he doesn't know about it, as long as she doesn't find out about it, then it's not gonna affect the intimacy of the marriage. But I'm just telling you, every unrepentant sin is another brick that gets put in the wall that separates you not just from your spouse, but separates you from God. Because for some of you, the intimacy that you're missing isn't just from your spouse, it's from God, and you don't understand. And it feels like to you, God isn't there and God isn't present, or why doesn't God answer my prayers? And I'm just telling you, if there's this secret, unconfessed sin in your life, you have built a wall. And until Jesus comes in and starts to tear that wall down, you can't have intimacy, there won't be closeness. And so here's what I want us to do this week, between now and next week. I just want you to identify some of the bricks in the wall. Some of the bricks in the wall that create division and separation in your marriage. Now listen to me, notice what I didn't say. I didn't say identify some of the bricks in your spouse's wall. It's not the challenge. It's not to go home and say to your husband or wife, hey, let's talk about your bricks. Now, what are the bricks that you've put in the wall? I want to say to those of you who are single and listening to this, now is the time to identify the bricks in your wheelbarrow. It's much easier to deal with those bricks now than after you put them in the wall. And then the second thing I want to ask you to do between this week and next week is I just want to ask you to simply pray together with your spouse. So next week, we're gonna talk about different ways we tear down the wall and we build intimacy, but I just want it to start with prayer. And so to pray together, but don't stop there. Pray together out loud, okay? And just do it every day. This doesn't cost anything. You don't have to go anywhere to do this. It just takes a few minutes. According to some pretty reliable research, only about 8% of Christian couples say that they do this, that they pray together out loud every day. But according to that research, the divorce rate among couples that say they pray together out loud every day is about 1 in 10,000. About 1 in 10,000. There's almost nothing that you can do that will tear down the wall and build up intimacy more than taking just a few minutes to grab the hand of your spouse and pray out loud every day. And I know for some of you it's really intimidating. And I know how hard it is as a husband to start something new when you haven't done it for a long time. But I promise you, you will be more attractive to your spouse if you do this. I promise you this is what will tear down bricks that have got put in the wall. Just try it. I'm just asking you to try it for 1 week. Doesn't cost you anything. Don't have to go anywhere. Just pray out loud together every day for each other for 1 week and see what that does to the wall that has been built up. Let's pray. So Jesus, we first want to just recognize and thank you that you are the one who tears down walls. And you did that in our relationship with God. You tore down the wall. You made a way for us to have a connection with our Heavenly Father where sin had created division and separation. And God, we just would pray, Jesus, we would just pray that what you did for us spiritually, you would do for us in our marriages, that you would tear down that wall. And we just ask you for your help in this. So God, this week, would you give us humility and courage to identify some bricks, to confess some sin, to ask for help where we need it? Would you give us the humility and courage we need to just lean in and pray with our husband or wife if we're married? God, I pray that you would allow us as a church to model what it looks like to experience the intimacy that you designed marriage to have. So Jesus, we believe that you are the one who will make a way. And so we ask you for your help. It's in Jesus' name, amen.